talked a lot on the show about academic freedom and freedom of speech on university campuses. We've talked about people who've been fired because they express views different from the consensus on universities. Today we have a great guest. We have a guy who has not been fired. He's still teaching at the University of Vermont, but he has gotten a letter from the administration, a letter sent to everybody in the entire community saying that his values are different from those of the university, and the university divides the world into racist and anti-racist people, implying that he doesn't fit into the category of anti-racist. We'll hear about the situation he faces. We'll hear about how he's responding to that when we interview Professor Aaron Kindsvatter. We've been speaking a lot about academic freedom and freedom of speech at universities, and today we have an extraordinary guest, a man who is at the center of a battle at the University of Vermont, which is a public university subject to the First Amendment. This is Professor Kindsvatter. Do I have that right?
Kindsvatter, yes.
Kindsvatter, father of children in German, as he told me and explained to me. And he is the father of children in the sense that he's a professor who's training younger people to go into the world. But he's made some controversial statements about race and discrimination, and he has come under criticism with petitions. I'll let him tell his story.
So my story probably starts last summer when there was a policy proposal put forward in the counselor education program in which I work, in which would seek to define persons as either racist or anti-racist, depending on whether they supported what was deemed to be racist or anti-racist policies, in line with the work of Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. And it was suggested in this policy initiative that the program commitment to anti-racism should involve a ritual in which the commitment within the program to for anti-racism would be reified. The problem with this is that I'm in a program that prepares psychotherapists, and terms Kendi's term anti-racism is not a good fit for either counselors who are working in the schools or persons who are working in community mental health centers who might be experiencing.
Why not? Why doesn't it fit? Explain why it doesn't fit.
Because persons who are in mental duress tend to adopt very rigid ways of thinking about themselves and the world. And the purpose of therapy is to help them to confront these rigid ways of thinking that tend to lead to the manifestation of depression. Anti-racism mirrors that rigid way of thinking in that it seeks to define persons as either racist or anti-racist. That's not a healthy way of viewing the world. It's not nuanced enough in order to solve conflicts that are often do not fit neatly into black and white categories. And
so you made a professional judgment based on your expertise, based on your academic and professional expertise, that you didn't think these identity politics paradigms of dividing the world into racist or anti-racist fits into what you have to teach and communicate to your students, right?
They are the antithesis of mental health.
And so you exercised your academic freedom by expressing your own views on the matter, right?
I did.
And what did you say?
Well, I decided to speak out publicly when the dean, another term that one has to be familiar with to understand this story is DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. And diversity, equity, and inclusion, there have been policy initiatives that that require that each professor adopt diversity, equity, and inclusion criteria into their classes. And there's been a lot of confusion as to what exactly this means, because diversity, equity, and inclusion is not well defined. And so as a result, there have been many conversations going on in the college about what exactly diversity, equity, inclusion means.
Well,
And
let me ask you, does diversity mean diversity of ideas, diversity of points of view, or does it just mean diversity based on race, gender, sexual preference, whatever?
Well, I don't know. It certainly does not include the diversity of thought that you are referring to. It should, but it does not. And the dean of my college sent out an email indicating that conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion were causing harm to people within the college. And so I sent an email asking him to define what he meant by harm. In my experience, terms like harm are often used as sort of a cudgel in order to attain ideological compliance, because the idea that you might be harming somebody is so terrifying to people on campus that they will comply with almost anything in order to avoid being viewed as someone who's being harmful. So it started out with my
What does
asking the
harm
dean
mean?
for a
Obviously, we
definition
all
of what he
agree
meant by
that
harm.
nobody should harm another physically. Nobody should come over and punch somebody in the mouth. What does harm mean in the context of education? Does it mean challenging a person's views?
Your guess is as good as mine. I'm still waiting on a definition. But I think, listen, you're asking for a definition. We're not playing the definition game here. We're playing the power game. And
What
the
do you mean by
two
that?
don't go together. You know,
What do you mean by the power game?
that uh, if we're talking about definitions, we're going to define what something is and what it isn't, so that we can make sure that we have civility within the college. If we're playing the power game, we're going to use words that cause a sense of fear and foreboding in people, so that they will just do what it is that we are wanting them to do. And so if, for example, you just want people to engage in diversity, equity, inclusion conversations, and you don't want them to put up too much fuss about it, you simply say that people are being harmed by those who are putting up a fuss about it. And that's the
Well, let me
power
just
game.
combine what happened to you with what happened at Georgetown Law School the other day and ask you your views on that. So would diversity and other inclusion education include two professors having a conversation bemoaning the fact that African American students don't seem to be doing as well in grades, and thinking about how to improve that? That conversation got two professors fired at Georgetown University. Would that conversation be required under this diversity and inclusion criteria to have that conversation? How would the University of Vermont handle a recording of two professors having a conversation, one of whom says, gee, I really get very worried about the fact that African American students seem to be performing less well on grades than their white counterparts? How would University of Vermont deal with that under its inclusion and diversity criteria?
I think that the University of Vermont would handle that situation in the same way that an abusive spouse handles a situation where they want to get compliance out of their partner. They would say that there's something that's not right about them. There's something that they want them to do, but they would never quite define what it is that they would want to do. And the abused partner would be wandering around saying, I'm not quite sure what you want me to do here. I'm not quite sure what I can talk about and what I can't. And I have to tell you that I don't know anything about the situation to which you are referring, but what I can say is if we are serious about addressing the intractable problems that stem from race, we have to have conversations about factors that lead to disparities. And those are not necessarily always going to be comfortable. And if people can't be allowed to bring these subjects up and to talk about them freely, then universities are not going to be helpful in helping to address some of these intractable problems that stem from that pertain to race and racism.
So what happened to you? You expressed views that were somewhat different from other people's views on these issues,
Well,
and there's a petition now to what?
In response to my email to the dean, I was told that I was by another administrator that I was not being consistent with the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics, and it was at that point, between the dean using the word harm in order to sort of shut down conversation, and with someone else suggesting that I was not acting in accordance with the professional code of ethics, that I decided that it was time to now that UVM, the University of Vermont, is too much of a closed system to change from within, and that a larger audience needed to be engaged around some of these issues. And so I decided to start that initiative by talking about the problematic habits of mind that informed a teach-in that the University of Vermont recently conducted called Turning Towards Whiteness, in which a number of vaguely defined societal ills were associated with persons of a particular race. That is very, very anti-intellectual and dangerous habit of mind. And so I
Who
spoke
was
out
making those arguments
about this publicly and talked about what my own responses, what my own reaction was to this teach-in, and also my objections to the advancement of policies, for example, the policy in the graduate counseling program that would define persons as either racist or anti-racist, depending on what kind of policy they support. I spoke out about how we need to be very careful about that, and that caused a bit of a stir. And one of the things that happened after that is the provost of the university sent out a message to the entire university that indicated that the university values were different from my own values, and that any of my students who felt that they did not want to finish the semester in my classes were under no obligation to do so. And that's
was the school basically sending out a message saying that under the classification of racist, anti-racist, you fit into the category of racist? Were they saying that?
I think they were saying that. They did not go so far as to say that explicitly.
But isn't that the implication? If they say the world is divided into racist and anti-racist, and the students shouldn't have to take or shouldn't take your classes because you don't reflect the values, aren't they essentially saying that you don't fit into the anti-racist paradigm, therefore you must fit into the racist paradigm?
Yes, and interestingly, although they define, they talk about the terms racism and anti-racism, they never define precisely under what circumstances one would be judged to be either one or the other. And
Are
yes,
you a
and
racist?
one other thing I'll just say is that uh, like an abusive relationship, the University of Vermont seems to work on innuendo. And so it's often very unclear what precisely they are saying. And so, for example, one administrator referred to me as being anti-DEI, but we've never really defined what diversity, equity, and inclusion means. So what we have is this system where you're supposed to do something, and it probably would be safe ground to sort of repeat what Kendi and D'Angelo have been saying. But anytime someone in charge feels that you're not quite towing the line, they can then say, well, you're actually anti-DEI because you have, you've spoken out of turn or whatever. So the parameters for what exactly they're asking for are extremely unclear. And
how would you
also,
define yourself? Do you regard yourself as somebody who is a racist? Do you regard yourself as somebody who believes in racial equality? Are you committed to diversity, inclusion? I don't know what the last letter is, but tell us about yourself a little bit and your views on race.
I would say that in no way, in no reasonable sense of the term, am I racist. And moreover, I would agree. I think we should stop using the term systemic racism because it's too broad. But I agree that there are racial issues as a society that it would be really good for us to think about addressing. So I am on board with all of that. And to the extent that in talking about diversity, that would include diversity of thought, and inclusion would include inclusion of, different reasonable authors. So you could teach Ibrahim X. Kendi alongside of someone like Shelby Steele, for example, or John McWhorter.
Right.
That is what a university should be doing, is that kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and helping people to explore each other's worldviews. But we've really gotten away from that because of this, because we've moved into a territory where we are demanding vague ideological compliance.
Have you taken any public positions on race-based affirmative action, for example?
No, I don't have a position. I'm not really familiar with that issue, and it's not inherent in my job at all. And so, I don't have a position on that particular issue, other than to say, I'm sure that there are well-informed people on both sides of the question who should be free to talk with each other about what the aspirations are, what the unintended consequences of various policy proposals might be, and so forth.
Because there are people who say that race-based affirmative action really does discriminate against white people. Is that your view? Have you expressed views like that?
No, but what I would say, I haven't given that enough thought to arrive at an opinion on it. What I would say is discriminatory and is racist is assuming that a certain group of characteristics is associated with persons of a particular race. And that is, and you can already begin to see how that kind of thinking begins to impact people of color, because they have very special names for Black people and people of color who do not toe that identity consciousness line. One of the most ridiculous ones I've heard lately is multi-ethnic whiteness, which is a way to call a black person or a brown person white because you don't like the fact that they're not adhering to sort of a far left progressive ideology.
So what you're saying is this is as much about political ideology as it is about race, that race doesn't necessarily define a person's political views, but when you combine race with what you call a left-wing political ideology, then you get to the identity politics where certain characteristics are associated with race, particularly if you're white, you must be, and then fill in the blank. You must be a white supremacist, you must be discriminating, you must be this, you must prove that you're not a racist. The burden of proof is on you if you're white to prove that you're anti-racist. Is that what you're saying that this diversity inclusion paradigm requires?
Yeah, I think that that's part of it. The only thing that I would add to that is that doesn't necessarily just affect white people. That any person of color or any black person who doesn't toe this line also has the onus to prove that they're not a racist. So yeah, I mean, in a very strange way, this is almost entirely about ideology and politics, and actually has very little to do with race. It's just, I don't know, race provides a foothold for this ideology, is what I would say.
So now you've been the subject of a petition. How many people have signed it, and what does the petition say?
Oh, I have no idea. I haven't even looked at it. Somebody told me something about like 2,000 people have signed it. I have no idea what it says.
What are they calling for? What are you at risk for at this point?
That's unclear. What I would say is that if the University of Vermont was interested in facilitating freedom of speech, then and not ideological conformity, then the message from the provost would have simply said, we support freedom of speech at the University of Vermont and nothing else. She didn't do that. What she did is she said that my values are markedly different from the values of the university. And
in what
I don't
way?
know.
In what way? Did she identify in what way your values are different from that of the university?
Well, you're playing the definition game again, and this isn't the definition game. This is the power game. But what I would say, the question that I would ask is, what values inform a teach-in like turning towards whiteness, where societal ills are blamed on someone of a particular or associated with someone of a particular race? That kind of thinking always comes back on the people in society who have the least amount of power to defend themselves from it, and it is being passed off at the University of Vermont as a kind of intellectual refinement.
So tell us about this teach-in. Who conducted it? Who was in it? What was its theme? Were questions raised? Tell us a little bit about the teach-in.
Well, I watched it and I didn't take notes, so I'm not sure how well I can summarize all of it. What became clear, and it is clear in the title, is that there are a number of disparities within the United States, and that those disparities could be traced back to the need of initial white settlers to maintain dominance over people of color. And then it went on to make several other just very broad claims. And again, once you start associating race with vaguely defined societal ills, you're really beginning to create problems for the people in society who need the protection from that kind of thinking.
So who conducted the teach-in? Were there faculty members there? How many students were there?
It was an online teach-in. It was put on by the administration of the University of Vermont. I think some of the speakers were perhaps brought in as outside speakers, but there was an administrator who did some of the the initial introduction to the work. So
officially sponsored by the university administration?
Absolutely, yes.
And what did you say about it when you watched it? What statement did you make about the teach-in?
I talked about the fact that I found the claims that the teach-in made to be unfalsifiable, and the thinking that goes into associating societal ills with a particular race is very unsophisticated, incredibly crude, but also
so what you were saying basically, my understanding then is this teach-in was blaming white people for the ills of the country. In that broader generalization,
that would certainly be the message that a person could take away from that. Obviously they didn't come out and say that directly, but one could reach those conclusions based on looking at the teach-in for sure.
Were there any dissenting views expressed in the teach-in? Were views similar to yours or anybody else allowed to be expressed in the teach-in?
None whatsoever. I was contacted privately later by people who said, we're interested in addressing intractable issues stemming from racism too. However, we don't think this sort of punitive, blaming, as you use to use your word, or this way of thinking where we're going to associate societal problems with persons of a particular race is the way to go. That the difficulties that we're facing are much more complicated than that.
There is a Marxist African-American professor who bemoans the fact that there's so much of a focus on race. He argues that class is really what, as a Marxist would, class is really what distinguishes elements of society, and the focus ought not to be on race, it ought to be on class. If somebody expressed a view like that, whether it be a black person or a white person, would that be within the accepted values of the university, or would that person, he or she, also get a letter from an administrator saying you're out of sync with our values?
I seriously doubt it. Although I have to say that there's a big difference between Marxism and this racial neo-Marxism, because Marxism is about, as I understand it, and this isn't my area, but Marxism is about uniting. It's about persons of a class uniting in order to, participate more fully in society. And what we're talking about here, when we're talking about teaching, turning towards whiteness, is we are talking about people dividing themselves based on race. And so Marxism, I'm not advocating for Marxism as a political ideology. I don't know that much about it, but it does purport to unite people. And
Workers
things
of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains, is the famous statement that
I
comes out
couldn't
of
say, but
Marxism.
I think that Marxism,
Obviously,
at its core, wants to unite people, and I think that ideas like turning towards whiteness, ultimately, whatever its intentions might be, are likely to divide people at a time where we really do need to come together as
I,
one country.
I'm not sure I understand the term toward whiteness. Is this a term of a derogatory term, saying it's bad to turn to whiteness? Is it something that's descriptive? We are turning to whiteness. Is it a reaction? Explain the term to me. What's intended? What's behind that term?
I think what they're getting at in that title when they're talking about turning towards whiteness is they're saying we're going to turn our focus on whiteness and show how it's a problem in society.
Well, it's hard to imagine any academic saying turn toward blackness and show that that's a problem in society. If anybody ever dreamed of saying that,
Well, that's where
they
this
would
is
be
headed.
obviously pilloried, right?
That's where this, I mean, it's fundamentally, it's the same thought system. I mean, yeah, it's not headed in that direction now, but it'll get there eventually.
But you can imagine
because the idea of blaming one particular race of people on societal ills that we are experiencing is incredibly unsophisticated, and it's incredibly easy to adopt. So you might have groups who are legitimately racist, who are looking for opportunities, I don't know, to spread their ideology. And you know what my grandpa used to say is, "What's good for the goose is what is good for the gander." And so, what'll happen is this way of thinking, were it to continue to become popular on campus, you will have groups of people who need to identify people that they need to hate, and they'll say, let's adopt our thinking to that way. It's clearly legitimate. It's going on campus. We're just going to change the people that we think are the problem.
well, and of course, it flies in the face of Martin Luther King's dream when he said, I want to live in a time when my children will be judged by the quality of their character rather than the color of their skin. Identity politics pushes in a different direction. But regardless of who's right or who's wrong, and this is not an area of right or wrong, I have close friends who support identity politics. They explain the reasons why they do it. They think it's time for us to understand the importance that race, both blackness and whiteness and brownness, have played in our history. I understand that point of view, and there are others who say our goal should be to not focus on race, but to focus on questions of character. There are some who say focus on economic inequalities without regard to race. These are all disputed issues. What I want to get to in the remaining time that we have is the chilling effect that you getting this letter and the petition has had on the free speech of you, your colleagues, students who may have a different point of view than that reflected by the diversity inclusion paradigm that the university has put forward almost as a loyalty test. Yeah. Have you sensed any impact this has had on the nature and quality of conversation and discussions around these issues?
Oh, yeah, there is no, well, I mean, the case that you were mentioning to me where two professors were talking about disparities and got fired as a result of it. I mean, those kinds of conversations are just absolutely being shut down. And I would imagine, so the provost's letter to me went out to the entire university community. And, you know, whether it was her intention or not, I can't imagine that somebody who shared my concerns would want to follow in my footsteps, who wants to have the entire university community hear that you are that your values are different from the university's values, and that if you speak up about something that you find deeply troubling, that you're going to get you're going to get you're going to get labeled as harmful and dangerous and out of line with professional ethics and so forth.
Why would they send that letter to the entire university community? Why wouldn't they send it just to you and see what your reaction is? Why would they, I hate to use the word defame, but it sounds to me like the university has perhaps defamed you, has sent a letter out making points about you that are designed to have you held in contempt by a large number of the students. Why would they do that?
I think because they're playing the power game. And also because I don't think that their teach-in turning towards whiteness is defendable. I think that they have a choice between really making an example of me and making an apology for this ill-informed racist teach-in that is going to ultimately be harmful to the people in society who have the least amount of power. And
well, that's your view, and people on the other side can express their views, but they're saying to you, you can't express your view without coming in for the kind of administrative criticism. And, it's not as if just some other professor wrote a letter saying, oh, Alan expresses views that I don't agree with. This is a formal letter from the university administration saying the University of Vermont essentially condemns you. And the way I haven't read the letter, but the way it's been described in the context of the paradigm of you're either racist or anti-racist, it sounds to me that they are telling the university community that you fall on the racist side of the paradigm. Is that the way you understand it?
All of this is based on innuendo rather than actual assertions. That, again, if you're playing the power game rather than the definition game, you never want to make a hypothesis that can be refuted. And so you never want to speak in clear terms or use definitions. And so what the university has done is to kind of have this global, I don't even know what you would call it, shaming, I suppose, without actually making much in the way of an assertion. They haven't said, for example, in what way my values differ from the values of the university. They just said that they do. And
what impact has it had on you? Do fewer students enroll in your course? Have you gotten criticism from students? Do you think this is the first step toward trying to discipline you or take away your tenure? How do you perceive this letter, and what impact has it had on you as a professor?
I would say it's had, okay, listen, if you decide to take so the impact that it's had is that it has created a mechanism whereby students can leave my classes. And I respect
when you teach, do you teach this, or is this part of your teaching?
What's that?
Is this part of your teaching?
Yes.
When you teach your classes, do you make these points in class, or are these points you've only made outside of class?
No, I don't. I also distinguish between, I really go out of my way not to share my personal views in class. What I do is I try my very best to, as a lawyer, you know the term steel man, to make the best argument I can for opposing points of view. And so, so what I've done is I've taught Ibram X. Kendi alongside of people like John McWhorter, and I try to represent what those folks are trying to say with as little bias as I possibly can, and then I try to I try to guide students in reaching their own understandings about these issues.
Have any complaints been made about your actual teaching, your in-class teaching? Has the university criticized you for anything you do in the classroom?
No. In fact, my evaluations from last semester were quite good, where I was where I was using a heterodox perspective. Although there was, I guess, what you would term struggle sessions within my program, where there was a great deal of anger expressed about the fact that that I was teaching persons like Shelby Steele alongside of persons like Ibram X. Kendi, and the assertion made was that people like Shelby Steele were not a good fit with our curriculum and were not in line with diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So,
well, certainly they're in line with diversity.
Pardon me?
Clearly, to have a different point of view expressed is part of diversity. Have any students come to your support? Do you have student support, or have the students been frightened to stand behind you?
I have, and I have encouraged the ones who have had just to kind of not get involved. But I've received some. I've received almost nothing but support, and I received a great deal of support from people who seem to me to have very reasonable perspectives. The two things I haven't received. I have not received much in the way of people sending hateful messages, nor have I received, which is, I think, the fear, persons who might be considered on the extremely far right saying, "Oh, I'm so glad you're speaking up against those people," or whatever. So all of the messages that I've received have been positive and supportive, and I think in the end, most students really appreciate good faith efforts on the part of professors to share different points of view on these very difficult issues. So
they do appreciate it, but are they willing to speak out and incur the wrath of those who don't appreciate it? That's often the question in an academic setting.
I'm sure that they would be willing to, and I hope they don't. I have protections that students do not. And if students wanted to speak out on this issue, the way that I would hope that they would do it is that they would not come specifically to my defense, but that they would write letters to the president of the university asking that diversity of thought be included in the diversity of the DEI statement, and that inclusion of different points of view be included as a definition of inclusion. And so
that makes a lot of sense. Have you received any support from the organization called FIRE, the Freedom and Individual Responsibility on Campus organization?
They are fairly new. An organization that I'm a little more familiar with is Counterweight, which is based in England, and they are beginning to work on these issues. And there's the organizations that recognize that there's something that's deeply wrong on university campuses are beginning to be formed, and I hope to see some drastic changes over the next 5 years or so. But
have there been any discrimination against you in promotion and salary, any material impact that it's had on your life?
Not yet, but I'm not ruling out the possibility that this could lead to my termination. It's you never whenever you speak out on an issue like this, the first thing that they begin to do is they start digging to see if you've ever said anything wrong, or they begin to make a case against you. And so while I can easily stand by the statements that I've made in my videos, that tends to focus attention on a person in a very negative way. And so
but you have tenure, right? You have tenure.
I do have tenure, though. Yes.
And it's a public university.
It is a public university.
And it's not going to be easy for them to terminate you with tenure from a public university based on your academic freedom and expression of your views. They would have to contrive some argument that would be very difficult based on the evidence that I'm aware of against you. But you're saying that there are some people probably who are looking for that evidence. They would like to find an excuse.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because you're an inconvenient character on the campus from the administration's point of view, right?
That's absolutely true. And the other thing that's really interesting is that all of the supportive communications that I've received, and I suppose there's not counting the ones online, this is just emails. I think I've received about 200 messages of support. All of them seem to think that my job is at stake. So whether it is or is not clear, but the perception is that by speaking out on this issue, I have put my job in jeopardy. And that is
well, that sends a message to other people. It doesn't matter whether your job is in jeopardy, as long as it's perceived that your job may be in jeopardy. That will send a chilling message out to other faculty members and students. Are you taking any precautionary steps? For example, I know professors now who insist on all of their lectures being recorded and preserved so that people can't say, you know what he said in class, you know what he responded to a student. Have you been in touch with a lawyer? Are you in any way seeking to preempt the efforts to remove you if you think there are some such efforts?
No, I've got better things to do with my time. I've got lessons to plan and so forth and so on. And if the university wants to pursue this, then I guess at that point I will begin to think about how I want to respond. My only intention right now is to continue to make videos about this issue to try to illustrate how much of a problem this is on campus. But I'm not rattled. I'm not worried. I have no respect for the way that the university is acting, and I'm not, and also they're incredibly predictable. So, if at some point an assertion is made that I need to respond to, I'm happy to do that. But in the other meantime, I've got better things to do, and hopefully they can get busy on cleaning up their act.
Well, you say you have better things to do, and I'm sure you do, but right now you kind of represent freedom of speech and academic freedom on the university. So whether you like it or not, you've been thrust in a position where you represent the important values of free speech and academic freedom. And so those of us who support that have to support you. Whether we agree with you or not on the merits is not the important issue. The important issue is you have the absolute right as a tenured professor at a public university, a legal right, a constitutional right, to express your points of view. You also have the academic freedom right, whether it's a private university or a public university, whether you're right or wrong, to express your views. And so I hope your appearance on this show will garner you support. Again, not necessarily for the content of your views. People can reasonably disagree about your content of your views, but for your right to express those views and for your right not to be chilled, discriminated against, or have the university tell you, basically, and tell the entire community that somehow you're different from the values of the university. It seems to me you deserve our support on that issue. So thank you. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with my audience? I know my audience will want to share with you the thought of keep fighting for your conception of justice and keep fighting for free speech and academic freedom, and we stand behind you. And I'm sure I'll get calls probably on both sides of the issue of the content of your views, but I doubt I'll get calls on both sides of the issues of your right to express your views. I think every reasonable person should support that. Any final thoughts or words that you want to leave us with?
What I would just say is that I think that most people do not want this for their universities in our country. And so if people keep asking me what they can do, and what you can do is the next time that your university that you graduated from, if you went to college, the next time that they call you and ask for a donation, ask if they have a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. And if they do, ask them if diversity of thought is included in their conceptualization of diversity, and ask them if inclusion of different perspectives is included in their definition of inclusion. And if they're not, tell them that you're not going to give them another dime until they clean up their act.
Well, that's certainly an interesting approach, and you can contribute it to organizations like FIRE and others that fight against this kind of suppression of free speech. Congratulations on your willingness to fight the system, your willingness to stand up for your values, your willingness to defend free speech and academic freedom, and know that many of us stand behind you and support you and wish you well. And your students are fortunate to have somebody with as independent a mind as yours obviously is. So keep doing what you're doing and keep expressing views that may be different from the views of others at the university. Thank you so much for appearing on the Dershow.
Thank you, sir.
What an interesting person. What an interesting interview. This gives us some real insights into what's going on in universities outside of the context of firing, of censorship. This is a more nuanced attempt by the university to control the speech of professors and probably everybody else on the university campus. We'll continue to hear from people who have been victimized by campus censorship. We spent a lot of time with the professor, and so we don't have time for your questions and comments today, but keep them coming, because for the next Dershow, we want to hear from you. Without the wits, the Dershow is not complete. An important part of the Dershow is your voice, your questions, your comments. Please call 24/7. The number is 216-710-0050. Keep your comments short and to the point. Again, the number for you to call 24/7 is 216-710-0050. Hard questions, criticisms, everything's fine. Just keep your questions short, and I'll answer them all on the Dershow.